All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm Michael Gracia, and I am hosting the panel of with Frankenstein historian, Boris Karloff historian.
Either way.
Ron Mccluskey. I just want to welcome you guys to the Northeast Comic Con, where it's guaranteed not boring and parking is free. I've been doing panels all weekend here. I am very excited. I've talked with a lot of great people, and this one I'm super excited to talk with because I am a Boris Karloff fan. I'm a big fan of the old black and white Universal monster movies, and Frankenstein movies, the whole group of them, are actually my second favorite monster movies they do next to the Wolfman.
Okay.
So I am super excited. And I actually love drawing the monster. He's one of my favorite go-to monsters to draw. And so let me introduce Ron Mccluskey, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. How are you today? Let me start off because of what you just said. It's interesting. Karloff did many, many things in his life and career, but he never played a Wolfman.
Yeah.
He played a vampire. He played Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Of course, he played the Frankenstein monster, but never a Wolfman.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And if you think about the history of Universal and what happened, is it kind of started with Lon Chaney Sr. And when he made films, they never really technically were called horror films. So what I used to say is that Lon Chaney Sr. just played ugly leading men. And then eventually horror came in. So anyway, so it started with Lon Chaney Sr., and then he died of cancer, unfortunately. Bela Lugosi filled in just for a little bit, but Karloff really took over the mantle from Chaney. And then Karloff went to New York, and who filled in for him but Lon Chaney Jr.? And Lon Chaney Jr. played the monster and the mummy and Dracula, and the Wolfman. So he had a much more important film career in horror, but unfortunately, I don't think he just picked the right films to be in after that. But Karloff did. Karloff just had a great, great career.
Yeah. So before we get into everything, and I just see there was a comment, somebody asked who's the speaker is. I'm assuming they mean me. And I'm not on screen right now, guys. I'm giving Ron the screen the whole time, but if you're a regular viewer at home, you know my face, so it doesn't matter. Can you tell us about yourself and how you got into your love of Karloff?
Yeah, I think, though, in Massachusetts, you can only have one bald person on TV. So that's why I throw in jokes once in a while. Anyway, I grew up in a place called Westfield, New Jersey. And Westfield also happens to be the hometown of cartoonist Charles Addams, who created the Addams Family. And there's a connection between Addams and Karloff, but I'll get that in a minute. When I was 7 years old, I got my first monster model, Frankenstein, fell in love, and just for some reason focused on Frankenstein. And then as I got older, because of magazines like Famous Monsters of Filmland, they interviewed these stars, and you got to learn about their life. And then I focused on Karloff. And just a fascinating life. I mean, he did so many things, had such an interesting background. He really became, in a way, a role model for how you should live your life and your career, that if you want something, just don't give up. Just keep pursuing. The man was 44 years old. He had made 80 movies by 1931. He should have given up. He should have said, this is not going to work. But he didn't. And then he made Frankenstein, and it truly changed his life and his career. So as I was growing up, I just fell in love with this guy in the films. When I was 13 years old, I read that he was sick in the hospital. So as a fan, I just wrote him a letter and said, hope you're feeling better. And 3 months later, I got an envelope from California. Inside was a card that said, I'm fully recovered and back to work. Wow. Signed by Boris Karloff. Dated October 1968, and he died 4 months later.
Wow.
I've been told by collectors that is worth $5,000, that card and that envelope. Mm-hmm. So once he spoke to me, in a way, he spoke to me. I said, that's it. This guy is my guy. I just fell in love. Years later, I started attending some of these conventions, and I had a chance to meet Sarah Karloff, who was wonderful. And the first thing I said to her, and this was about 25 years ago, someday I want to make a movie about your father. And she goes, yeah, good luck. But darn it, I didn't give up. And that's how this was created. I wrote and produced this documentary about the life of Boris Karloff. And again, I just said, this has to be done. I feel he is an icon for a certain type of film. If you talk about gangster films, you think of Cagney and Bogart. You think about musicals, you think of Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire. When you think about Westerns, you have to think John Wayne. But as far as an icon for horror films made in that time period, there was nobody other than Karloff. I know Lugosi came close, but Karloff was the guy. Well, Chaney, unfortunately, Senior died, so he really couldn't make the transition to sound, although he made one or two. And Chaney Jr., he was okay, but he didn't, to me, have the depth or the range that Karloff did. And Karloff embraced being typecast. He thought it was wonderful. He was lucky that he had a trademark or a hook to his life and his career. So it's been a great trip.
Yeah. And so, I'm sorry, I was just going to look something up
That's
to ask
okay.
you a question, but
Sure.
I'll do it after. With getting into Karloff,
Mhm.
and your love of him. So let's talk about this movie. It's
Right.
not out yet.
Well, no.
I'm sorry.
The film actually debuted in theaters September 17th. Then it went to streaming, and it's streaming right now on Shudder.
Okay.
And in 2 months, it will be available on DVD and Blu-ray. I don't know if you've had a chance to visit my room, but if you want, after this, come visit to where I'm showing my stuff. Give me your email, and then when it comes out, I will contact you, and I'll give you a copy. And if you want, I'll autograph it as well. But it was just so interesting finding out about this guy. I mean, more than I knew. And we talked to people that worked with him and knew him and was influenced by him. So it was great to hear all these stories.
Yeah. And what I'm interested in is process-wise behind the movie, because there's so much to him.
Right.
How did you figure out what to decide to leave in, what to leave out?
Okay.
When you were talking with these people, the stories you chose to use, what was the movie? How is it focused on
Right.
Karloff?
Well, what I did, and I don't know whether you people do this as well, but once I had in my mind I wanted to make this film, and I started out really about 20 years ago just interviewing people and just keeping it to the side. I needed a filmmaker, I needed a partner, I needed somebody that could help me take it to the next step. And I would watch Turner Classic Movies and watch the credits and go, okay, who made this, who did this? I don't know how many people I reached out to, but I saw a documentary on Leslie Howard. Now, Leslie Howard was also from England. He had a limited film career, unfortunately, because he died during the war, but his biggest film was Gone with the Wind, okay? In fact, ironically, he was almost cast as Henry Frankenstein, and Bette Davis was almost cast as Elizabeth, but that never happened. But they worked together in a film called Petrified Fires. So I saw this documentary, and it was done through the eyes of his daughter. And I said, wait a minute, that would be a great way for me to tell my story, have Sarah Karloff tell the story of her own father. So I saw the credits. Guy's name was Thomas Hamilton. Because of internet, I reached out to him. He's in London, England. We became friends 3 years ago, and we ended up making a movie together. I mean, between him and I, we made a whole list of people we wanted to talk to, a whole list of where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do. We flew out to California. We had a chance to interview so many great people. Roger Corman and Dick Miller. Who else did we also talk to? Christopher Plummer, Ron Perlman, Donald Glutt, and they all just had great stories to tell. One of the best interviews I liked was Ron Perlman, because Ron Perlman took the perspective of saying, as an actor, you all think of the opening nights and the tuxedos and the parties, whatever. But he says, it's hard work. It's not easy making a movie. And one of the things I admire about Karloff so much is he had a grueling task making Frankenstein. He would have to come to the studio at like 4 a.m., sit through 4.5 hours of makeup, get on the set, and sometimes work a 12-hour day. I mean, it was terrible.
Yeah.
Then he had to make The Mummy. The Mummy was even more tiresome and more grueling because of the costume and the makeup. So after those films, he was a big star, and he took a chance because some people say, you know what, we ought to have a union for the actors. And he was the founding member of the Screen Actors Guild.
Wow.
His card is number 9. And he cared so much about the actors and so much about what people go through. And he's responsible for that. So that's just a great part of his story. That's how much he cared about other actors, to make sure that they were represented and that people cared about them. So it was great. It was great learning about these things. And we had a chance to go to the Screen Actors Building itself. We looked up through files and records and all the different contracts about him. In fact, in one of the records, we found out that during the making of Frankenstein, they wanted him to work on a Sunday. So he put in the grievance saying, I can't work on Sundays. But that's what it was like back then. You know, they would make actors do things that other actors didn't want to do. And Frankenstein, really, he was still an unknown at that point. Within months, though, of Frankenstein, he became a star.
Yeah.
So Thomas Hamilton and I sat down and says, okay, we've got all these great interviews. How do you want to do this? We had so much film. We had about 3 to 4 hours of a movie. And when we formed with Shout Factory, that eventually did the film, we had to cut it down to 100 minutes. And it was a shame because we had so much great things. Well, in this DVD, in this Blu-ray, if you get it, it shows both of those films. So if we call it Boris Karloff, the rest of the story. So many interviews and so many people we couldn't talk to are now in this second film. So that's the great thing of buying this and seeing all those extra things.
That's fantastic. I do have a comment on the computer, but before I get to that, I just want you guys to know, if you have any comments or questions, just raise your hand, we'll call on you, and you can ask Ron any question from the audience there. The question I got is from, here it says, here's a fun question for Ron. If they were to make a movie about the early Universal days, who would you cast as Karloff, Lugosi, and Chaney Jr.?
Okay. For years, Sarah Karloff always thought that Jeremy Irons would have been great as Karloff.
I can see that.
At one time.
Yeah.
Not anymore. To me, there's one guy and only one guy. And he was the star of House. Remember House?
Mm-hmm.
And now I can't think of the guy's name. Hugh
Laurie.
Yeah, Hugh Laurie. When Hugh Laurie, during that show, once in a while, he would give that stare, you know, that deep, dark. Yeah. And I'm telling you, this guy is perfect. And I don't know if you're aware or not, but he put on an American accent for House, but he's from England, and he has an English accent. And he's thin, and I think he would be perfect. Now, Lon Chaney Jr., I don't know, that's tough, but definitely for Karloff, I think Hugh Laurie would be perfect. And again, he's a name, so I think people would go see the film.
Yeah, well, I would. I know him actually, even though I've watched House. I used to know him from his comedy stuff he used to do, Hugh Laurie. And he's hysterical.
Yeah, so different from House. And from what I understand with House, he had to do an interview on camera. He wasn't even in the same country at the time he interviewed. Mm-hmm. And they just gave him a script, but he had the accent and the attitude, and they said, that's House.
Yeah, no, that was a great show.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic show. Actually, before we get into more stuff about Karloff, like in the movie and stuff, so I'm very interested in the movie.
Yeah.
A lot. Actually, when I was looking up one of my questions for you, and I wanted to talk about like unknown roles of him, and your movie came up as like the third or fourth thing about Karloff.
Oh, wow.
So I was like really, really impressed. But there was one thing I know him as that I got a copy of a videotape when I was a kid, and I had to buy it on DVD, and I think I got it like in the early 2000s on DVD, Mad Monster Party. Yeah. That is one of my favorite Karloff pieces. My background is in illustration and animation, and to have that, that 3D, stop motion type of animation going on with Karloff's voice, I thought that was fantastic. I just wanted your opinion on, and this isn't the question I was looking up, but I was just curious what your thoughts on stuff like that he did was.
Well, I too grew up loving animation. In fact, my first love was to be a cartoonist. So I've always loved cartoons and animation. And the story I heard about that is right from the beginning. It was Chuck Jones. So it was Chuck Jones and Dr. Seuss who decided to do The Grinch, but then also Rankin and Bass wanted to do Mad Monster Party. Karloff was sick at the time and he couldn't leave England, so they actually flew out. They gave him the script and he recorded all his lines. Then they came back and they inserted it.
Mhm.
And for years I wanted to interview Phyllis Diller because I thought it'd be great to get that perspective, how they worked. They were never together. She did her lines, he did his lines, which nowadays it's common, but back then they would all be in one room,
Yeah.
and they would talk back and forth and do the script. But for this particular one, there wasn't. And then if you look at that film, it was running short. So they had to fill in other things. Of course, they couldn't get Karloff again. So they had to do like little scenes. They did a scene with the band playing. They did a scene with monkeys or something. And that was really just to fill in time so that they had enough time to fill out the movie.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it was the last film that Karloff plays a member of the Frankenstein family. Because Karloff originally played the creature, and then eventually he started becoming Baron Frankenstein, and he did other things. One of my favorite films, and I was talking about this earlier with collectors, is Frankenstein 1970. People, for some reason, don't like it. They say it's I love it. I think it is a great, great film. And it's about Baron Frankenstein. He's at his castle. He's not making enough money. A film crew wants to come and make a movie. So he takes that money, and what's he doing in the basement but creating another monster? But it's great. I love it. I just think it's great.
I'll have to check it. I don't know if I've seen that. I've seen a lot of stuff, so I gotta see
No,
if
if you
I've seen
can,
that.
Frankenstein 1970.
1970.
It's considered the opening is considered one of the greatest openings of all time. You've got to see the film at least for the opening, because what it shows is a monster's chasing a woman into a lake and then strangles her and drowns her. And then all of a sudden you hear cut, and then you realize that a film is going on. But that beginning was so iconic. They used to use that at the beginning of chiller TV and suspense and all that stuff. Just a great, great opening.
That's awesome. So you were talking about your movie a little bit, and you were talking about the interviews,
Right.
and you were very impressed by Ron Perlman. Who
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Ron.
Yeah.
I've been watching him for years, and it's interesting because I could see a little bit of the Karloff influence
sure.
on him.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious because I will watch the movie
Right.
at some point. Does he talk about at any point how Karloff influenced him in his acting? And because he's done a lot of makeup work.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, he does. Well, it's interesting. One of the filmmakers that Ron Perlman works with more than any other is Guillermo Del Toro. And we had a chance to interview Guillermo, and he's in our film. And years ago, I had created a thing called the Frankie Award, which is just a Frankenstein model painted in gold on a wooden plaque. And when we went out to interview him, the very last thing we did is, I have something for you. And I gave him the Frankie. He's so wonderful. He's so great. We took pictures together holding the Frankie. And he said he was going to put it on his fireplace mantle next to his Oscar. But he has this imagination and this thought process in making films. I think The Shape of Water was the best remake or updated version of The Creature of the Black Lagoon. Just wonderful. Nightmare Alley he has coming out now. But he is fixated with Karloff. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of his house, but he has Karloff all over the place. It's a huge Frankenstein head as soon as you walk into his house.
Really?
Yeah, just great, great stuff. And Sarah Karloff was responsible for getting us to get to Guillermo.
Oh, that's awesome.
And his goal is to remake Frankenstein. It's on his list. He's just waiting. He's just trying to find the right, I don't know, timing or actor or whatever, but I think it would be great.
Well, let me ask you about that, because they have made updated versions.
Yes. Yeah.
And of the updated versions, are there any that you enjoy or don't like? I mean, I don't want you to knock anyone that you don't want to, but I'm just curious on your thoughts of the remakes.
In my opinion, anybody who wants to go spend a couple $1 million making Frankenstein, good for them. Somebody came in my room and said, well, they haven't made one in years, but they have. They made a film. It was supposed to be called Igor first, but then it was called Victor. And it was the relationship between Victor and Igor. And it starred, I think, Daniel Radcliffe as Igor. And let me clear up a few things, because I know everybody gets this wrong, but let me clear this up. Let's start with the beginning with the book and then the film. There was never, ever, ever a Dr. Frankenstein. because in the book, as in the movie, he was thrown out of college. He didn't graduate because he wanted to make his own human being. In fact, in the movie, and you got to realize it's 1931, so the professor says, yes, he wanted to kill life and then recreate it. And the best friend says, oh, what's the difference with a few cats and dogs? And I'm sure a lot of animal people would go crazy there. And he said, no, he wanted to use humans. And he couldn't find it here at the university, so he left. Okay, so it was never Dr. Frankenstein. There was never an Igor until the third film. But in the book, he has no assistant.
Yeah.
And he's not in a castle, he's in an attic. So he rented an apartment that's in the attic of a building. Mary Shelley, on purpose, in my mind, never was in detail about how the monster was created, never in detail on how he looked. So that gave a wide door to Hollywood. I can now do what I want, and I'm not going to be against anything. So between Jack Pierce, who was the makeup man, James Whale, and Karloff himself, they created this image. And to me, the image is a flat head, scars on his face, and bolts on his neck. And that's Frankenstein. Since 1931, that image has been used over and over and over again. And you ask a child what that is, and right away they'll say Frankenstein. Now, let me clear up the confusion between the monster and the doctor, or Victor, being called Frankenstein. Whenever they showed that title, they always showed the creature. So it's obvious to think, well, then the creature's got to be named Frankenstein, because every time you see Frankenstein, you see the creature. So there's always been that confusion too. But then as time went by, all of it came together. And that's when Mel Brooks, who I think did just an amazing job, and Gene Wilder. I don't think Gene Wilder gets enough credit, because unfortunately it's called Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein. But Gene wrote the genesis for the story. Gene, as in fact, when they were making Blazing Saddles, he started writing the script. And back then there were several films out with Young in it. Young Winston was one of them. And he just put Young Frankenstein. And then him and Mel got together, and they came together. They had the same agent, had Marty Feldman, and had, now I can't think of his name, who played the creature. Peter Boyle. Peter Boyle and Marty Feldman had the same agent. So when they approached him to play the monster, he says, yeah, and I can do Igor. So that's how that came together.
Oh, really?
Just great behind-the-scenes stories on how things were made.
I just want to say there's a comment. Mike Wilkie, who's watching, said his all-time favorite is Young Frankenstein.
Right.
And I love that movie too. I
Yeah.
think it's fantastic. And I was actually just talking about that with my wife the other night.
Okay.
Because my wife and I are fans. We watch a lot of reruns of Everybody Loves Raymond.
Right.
And Peter Boyle's in it, and she was asking me, what did Peter Boyle do besides Young Frankenstein and Everybody Loves Raymond? And I'm like, we have to look at his IMDb. He's got a lot of stuff.
Right.
But then I just went into Young Frankenstein stuff, and I because I think that's one of the greatest.
Well, Peter Boyle was in a film called Joe. I don't know if you know that film, where he played a bigot and whatever. He was also in a Robert Mitchum film called The Friends of Eddie Coyle. He was a very good actor. He really was. And then I think he was in Monster Ball. I think that had some great stars in it. Yeah. But the thing I loved about Peter Boyle being in Everybody Loves Raymond, they actually did a Halloween episode.
Yes.
Where he comes in as the Frankenstein monster. Yeah. And Doris, his wife, is dressed up as the Bride of Frankenstein. Yeah. So I love when people can recognize, other roles they played or other things they did, and then, pay homage to that. Yeah. And it's just great stuff. I wish I had met him, Peter Boyle, but he passed away.
Yeah, he was one of those actors I would have liked to have met.
Yeah.
Just seeing if there's any more comments. I think something popped up.
Sure.
No. Oh, we got some from the.
Yeah, sure.
I actually wonder if there's truth in this. I had read that James Whale didn't like Boris Karloff and made him carry Colin Clive rather than use a dummy for that.
Okay. Well, what we discussed in the documentary is earlier that day, they did the scene with the little girl at the lake. Okay. And at one point they went to film it, and Karloff disagreed with the director and said, I don't think you should throw the girl in that. And they got into a little argument, and I think Whale kind of said to himself, you're just an unknown actor and I'm a director. What are you telling me what to do? No, we're going to do it my way. And supposedly Whale was so upset that later in the day when that scene came, where Karloff could have carried a dummy or somebody else other than Colin Clive, he made him carry Colin Clive up that mountain 40 times
Wow.
for a take that's in the distance.
Yeah.
There's no need to do that. But it was kind of like payback. I mean, Whale was even said at one time, you know, oh, this guy was just a truck driver before I found him. So I think Whale was walking away thinking that this film is going to make me, and it really made Boris Karloff. So I think there was a little resentment there on what happened. I still think he did an amazing job. And The Bride of Frankenstein too. I think those films really should be shown together, Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, because his performance, Karloff's performance is just great. Just great.
Yeah. Oh, got a question in the back?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just curious, we watched Boris also in the Thriller, this is the TV one.
Yeah.
But there was another TV show that kind of stole his character, The Munsters. Was that well received, or was there some fight back on that?
Well, The Munsters was made at Universal Studios, so they had permission to use that makeup, okay? It came out, ironically, the same time as The Addams Family. So two different networks had two different shows. Munsters was CBS, and The Addams Family was ABC. So they competed against each other, which unfortunately I think hurt each other, and they both only lasted two years on television. However, The Munsters actually then made a film called Munster Go Home. Yeah, two films. Okay, two films. Yeah. By then, Karloff was so unassociated with the film. He, wasn't involved at all. In fact, when Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein came out, again, he just thought that this is not in good taste. So, but Universal said, well, we'll pay you to promote the film. So he's actually standing by a poster, pointing up to the poster of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Now, they did work together on Abbott and Costello Meet the Killer, Boris Karloff, and they worked together on Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. But by that time, again, Karloff was so old, there was really a stuntman that had a mask on and played most of the part of Dr. Hyde. So, yeah. But yeah, so I'm partial to the Addams Family. I like that better. But I love the fact that they're remaking The Munsters by Ron Zombie. And that's going to be out, I think, before the end of the year. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a comedy. It's going to be a comedy, but Ron Zombie is known to do some strange things, so there may be some serious things in there too.
Just speaking of the Munsters, I want to give a little shout out. If you go into the ballroom there where the artists are, there is an artist, and he's a great guy. He's actually going to be on my panel tomorrow with careers in the creative arts, and we'll be talking about how we're going to have a few artists and talk about how they got into the business,
right.
And he's coming on. But yeah, if you want to stop by his table, he's got a book about the Munsters.
Okay, so, great.
And I by the way, I flipped through it. It's awesome. So let me just check the time because we are.
I think we're at 4 o'clock. So
okay.
We're good.
Yeah, we got 15 minutes.
15 more minutes.
So yeah, actually, I was going to bring up the Munsters, so thank you. I don't need to ask that question anymore, but I do want to ask. I mean, as an artist, I work with a lot of public domain stuff. I understand that the Universal monsters now are in public domain, but when they did the remakes of Frankenstein, some of them weren't Universal, and I was just curious on your take of the actors, of their interpretation of what the monster looked like, as opposed to the Karloff, standard that has been,
right.
And now anyone could use it because it's technically public domain.
Right.
Yeah.
Hammer was the first one to say, listen, why don't we go back and remake these films and let's make them in color and let's make it gory to attract the audience. So the first film they made, they didn't talk to Universal at all and whatever, but it became a huge hit.
Mm-hmm.
So Universal got smart and said, let's do this together. So in the second film, the monster looks a little bit more like the Frankenstein monster. Mm-hmm. If you will see the cover of my poster here, you'll see we purposely couldn't use the exact Frankenstein monster. That's why we have in the shadow, a guy with the bolts. Because again, it's just different. When you deal with a major studio like Universal or Disney or whatever, they're very, very protective on the copyright.
Yeah.
So you got to be real careful. So the Shout Factory said, no, let's not take a chance. Let's just do it this way. But over the years, so many people have done it. I mean, even acclaimed actors like, Robert De Niro. But in my opinion, there's nobody like Karloff. I mean, he just did it in such a way. He had such depth and feeling in his portrayal. And then in Bride of Frankenstein, I mean, when he says, "Friend good, fire bad," just so moved me. And the scene with the blind man and how the blind man's crying and saying, God has brought me a friend to be with. Just great stuff. And then, of course, at the end where he says, "We belong dead." Just great stuff, great stuff. And, of course, thank God he was smart enough to know that, okay, 3 films, that's it. Now I've got to move on. I've got to do if they want to make other films, okay. In fact, he was in House of Frankenstein with Glenn Strange, but he just felt he just didn't want to denigrate the monster anymore and portray it less than what he did.
Yeah, because he was very protective of the,
Yes.
of the monster.
Yes, he was.
And now let me just ask, because Boris, you mentioned that Sarah, his daughter,
Yeah.
that you're connected with, and she basically, not basically, but she runs the estate
Right.
for him. The stuff that she's doing now, I know you said she got you connected with people.
Yes.
Are you doing anything with the estate that, I mean, is this connected to it? How's working with the estate?
Right. Well, she has been terrific. And once this is out, it will be on her site. It'll be available. When she goes to convention, she will talk about this film.
Mhm.
Just so giving, because again, she knew how much we cared about her father. She knew this wasn't going to be a hatchet job and show negative things about him. But his life, his past was very interesting. And I'll tell you something that people will be surprised at. So most of his family, meaning from his grandfather to his father to his brothers, they all worked for the British government, and they were ambassadors, and they were stationed all over the world. Well, most of them were stationed in Bombay, in India, and that's where they all thought that William Henry Pratt was going to go, and he said, "No, I want to be an actor." So he pursued that, but it was kind of like he called himself the black sheep of the family. However, one brother was accused of murder. His father abused the family and the wife. His mother had mental issues. So that's all true. That's a part of the Karloff story.
Mhm.
But on the outside, you say, well, one brother was friends with Gandhi. One was knighted by the Queen. One did this, and it's all flowing. But behind closed doors, it wasn't that perfect of a family. So when he had a chance to leave and to pursue his career, he purposely wanted to make sure it was not in England, and he purposely wanted to change his name. He didn't want that name to be connected in case he was a failure, in case he didn't live up to his other family.
Yeah.
So that's what he did. So he left his family and he went and pursued. He first started in Canada. He traveled all the way across Canada, learned how to act, and then from there went to San Francisco, and from San Francisco went down to Los Angeles. His first film was made in 1919. He had a full career in the silent films. And then when sound came in, he started getting little parts, and then eventually Frankenstein. So most people don't realize he came from a background of prestige and wealth, but behind closed doors, it wasn't that great. But she has been fabulous, and she has been supportive, and it's great. And I'm very glad we had a chance to make her a part of the film.
That's great.
Yeah.
You just mentioned I wasn't aware of,
Okay.
that he had a long career in silent films.
Yes.
And before Frankenstein, what kind of roles was he playing in the
Well,
silent?
So here's what I say in telling the story, that because of his dark complexion, because he was of mixed blood, of Indian blood and English blood, he played ethnics. He played Mexicans. He played a French trapper. He played an evil baron. He played a Saudi prince. He played all these negative things in the silent era. And then I said, but once he became into the sound era, his whole career changed, and he ended up playing Mexicans and evil people and Arabs, meaning nothing changed. He still portrayed because of its complexion. And in many ways, that's what Lon Chaney Sr. did. When Lon Chaney Sr. came around, he did his own makeup, and he was able to change his look every single time and look like different people and be ethnic different people. But once Frankenstein came along, he said, thank God, now I have a hook. I have a trademark, and now I can take advantage of this and do that type of film and eventually do other films as well. Because if you realize, even though he was the monster, he was in comedies, on variety shows. He did Singing. He did some great stuff. He really did, and he varied what he worked on to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just quick, because we only have 10 minutes left.
10 minutes.
And I just want to know, is there any other questions at home or in the audience that you guys have? Nothing? Okay. Just want to make sure.
Okay.
I have a
Yes.
question, I think, when did he start doing the Mummy as well? It was another iconic artist, I think.
Yeah. Well, some people call the Mummy really almost like a remake of Dracula, because if you look at it, it's about a figure thousands of years old who had a love for a woman and wanted to have that woman join him. And in Dracula, that's kind of what Dracula was too. The Mummy was based on John Balderstone. John Balderstone was an amazing screenwriter. He did Dracula, he did Frankenstein. And in the 1920s, he was involved when King Tut, when that tomb was opened.
Mhm.
And he was the one that came up with the idea, well, there's never been a mummy movie, let's do the Mummy. And that film really showed his acting. When he did Frankenstein, then he followed up with The Old Dark House. It was basically the same thing. He just grunted and moaned and, was an evil guy. But in The Mummy, it was a love story. And he was just so fabulous in the way they shot it and the way that mummy comes alive for that first time. Just so thrilling and so chilling,
Yeah.
And then later on, he comes back as Ardith Bay, and he just has this stillness about him, and just so slow and so meaningful. And then they do that optical effect, which I still don't know how his eyes glow. Do you remember what I'm talking about? It's the one scene of the eyes are just glowing. So the Mummy, I think, really said, hey, we got a guy that can act. This is going to be great. And then he started getting more roles after that. So yeah, the Mummy was equally as important as Frankenstein was, in my opinion.
Sorry.
Anybody else?
Yeah, and I thought someone had a question, but yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just amazed, back in that time, all this had in black and white, you were so good at it.
Right.
Black and white signs to work with.
Right.
It's just amazing. I don't know who they have for directors or editors, but they did such a nice job.
Well, what they had back then is they had people that not only understood black and white, but really could make things look just perfect in the black and white with the shadows of gray and whatever.
Yeah.
From what I understand, his makeup, I think he was actually green because on film in black and white, it looked gray or pale, okay? So just great stuff. Karloff was old school. He didn't believe that music was necessary, but if you see Bride of Frankenstein and that score,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
oh man, so incredible. In fact, again, I don't know if you know Broadway or whatever, but in the score of Bride of Frankenstein, you hear the tune, da 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 da, and that's Valley High from South Pacific, which was done 20 years later. But Franz Waxman just created this remarkable score. And to this day, it's just so famous. I mean, it's just great. But yeah, black and white, they really knew their stuff. And then when color came in, that changed and they learned how to do things too. I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, I don't think, go ahead.
Yes, sir. You.
Well, going to colorization, what is your opinion on the colorizing of some of these films? I think they're doing more damage than good. White is better.
Okay. My opinion is, but if it exposes the movie to more people and gets a younger crowd to look at that, I don't know what's so bad. And I'll give you an example. Laurel and Hardy, March of the Wooden Soldiers, so great in black and white. But once they colorized it, millions of people all of a sudden started recognizing that film. And I don't think the colorization hurt it at all. Now, should they colorize Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein? I don't know. It'd be interesting. It really would. And if you like the black and white, then you got the black and white. But to colorize it, I think it'd be interesting.
Here's I'm just gonna give my thoughts.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a nostalgia feel on what you
Yeah.
grew up on.
Right.
I grew up on the black and white stuff. I'm a huge Zorro fan. I watched the Guy Williams Zorro. I have it on DVD.
Right.
But I have when I got it from the Disney whatever mail
Right.
order stuff, I got a colorized version of it. I was just rewatching it recently. And I was a little upset that it was colorized
Yeah.
because if I bought the tin that they had out years ago, they had it in it. That was the black and white
Right.
one. And it's just more of a memory. I don't hate the show
Yeah.
or I don't like it less,
Yeah.
but I just grew up watching the black and white. And that's,
Yeah.
to me, that's how I like to watch it.
Right.
But when you have colorization of stuff, I like you said, I don't think it really takes away from it. It's something you got to get used to. But I know a lot of kids that I work with kids, and if I show them something black and white, they're like, "Oh, geez,"
Yeah.
you know. And they want color. Sometimes because I do animation, I do comics. So if I don't show them 3D stuff, they get bored.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like I'll be like, "Hey, you guys, I want to show you a Bugs Bunny cartoon." Why? Is it Space Jam? No, it's not. It's it's whatever. I want to show you, whatever. What's Opera Doc? And I'm like, that's one of the best ones made, and they just. Exactly.
You said that this program is running now live.
Yes, we're live right now.
And then when is it going to be reshown?
Well, on Facebook, on my Facebook page, getintoon.net, you can watch it as soon as it ends. But later today, YouTube it takes a little time for YouTube to process it. So maybe in a few hours, it'll be viewable on YouTube again. Okay.
And this is going to cost $100 coming out of his pocket, but we're going to show it in black and white. Right? Yeah. Here's my favorite photographer. I love this woman.
Yes.
When I first met her, I said, "You want to go in a dark room and see what develops?" And she said, "What?" So anyway, go buy the DVD, go buy the Blu-ray, come to my booth, and I'll set you up. But I'm telling you, this is great because you're really going to get 2 movies in one, the original documentary and then Boris Karloff behind the story.
Yeah. I just want to make 2 quick comments that I have on the screen here.
Sure.
And then I want one more quick question from you before we go. So it says, one guy says he's a 3D anime, partial 2D animation for the most part. The other one says, I think watching the black and white, we tend to fill in the colors in our minds, which is interesting to say. And also, one of the things you said was that he wore green makeup. I thought I read it was like shades of brown. But I don't know. You might be right.
Okay, I've never heard of brown, but I have heard shades of gray. And some filmmakers, Carl Freud, is that the way to say his name? I'm not too sure, but he's the one that did The Mummy. He was a cinematographer, so he really knew about lights and shadows and dark, and so really some of those films, and also sometimes the scariest scenes were off screen. Yeah, and you could hear sound effects, or you could and. Your imagination, again, goes as to what, like in Frankenstein, when you hear, Fritz screaming and they open the door and there he is hanging, you just imagine what happened in that room. You didn't have to see it, but you imagine what happened. Yeah. And that's sometimes what they don't do in films today. They show too much, I think. It's too bloody, too gory. But to have that, to use your imagination, that's what I think is so wonderful. Yeah.
And my last question for you is just as an artist, I just wanted to ask you to promote so artists can see.
Okay.
You said you do a art show, Karloff Art Show. Can you just tell quickly what that's about?
What I've developed over the years is an appreciation of Frankenstein in all forms. So about 7 years ago, I came up with a thing called Frankenstein Artwork. And I contact artists from all over the world that portray the Frankenstein monster, either sometimes in a comical way or in a serious way. We show 52 images, and sometimes I actually do a gallery exposure, and I put it on the internet. So look for that. That'll be in October. But if there are any artists out there that want to send me things, let me know, and then I'll take a look and see if we have room to put it in.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here. So thank you for doing this. I really had a great time. I'd love to continue this conversation. I'd love to talk to people who have passion for something, and I hear it listening to you. And that's one of the reasons I want to see the movie, because I can hear just in your voice the passion you have for this man and the work that he's done. And it makes me want to go out and buy the DVD. Blu-ray, of course, because I need to see the extra hours of...
Yeah, the bonus will be on both. You have an option of either the DVD only or DVD Blu-ray, but both will have the bonus feature.
That's awesome. Yeah. I go Blu-ray these days. Okay. So I will definitely be looking for this. Thanks again for coming on. I'm going to be ending the podcast now. You guys, thanks for coming in, checking out. If you're here tomorrow, please check out my panels I'm doing. I got 3 panels tomorrow with a terrific set of artists at 3 different times of the day. If you like fantasy art, I'll be doing that, talking to the fantasy artists in the back room there. I'll be talking with the careers in the creative art, and I'll be talking with Tim Clark and Joe Souza, I always say his name wrong, who are going to be talking about the art of the weird that they do. Tim is the creator of the Boglin toys, and he's in the main room, and Joe created a character called the Monster, which I haven't had a chance to see yet. I'm dying to go check it out, but that'll be tomorrow too. So you guys, I look forward to seeing you guys there.
And it's a shame that the camera's only pointed this way, because, we have a full house standing room in the back. It's great, guys. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you soon.